because almond flour uses so much flour and basically, oh my god. Hi YouTube friends! So today we're going to go over the difference between coconut flour and almond flour, other than the fact that one is made of almonds and one is made of coconut. But that's beside the point. Like I mentioned, almond flour is made of ground almonds. Sometimes it's called almond meal if it includes the outside portion of the almond, the little brown coating on it. But usually if you get it blanched, it's just the kind of white inside part of the almond. And then coconut flour is pretty basic too. I find that coconut flour brands don't matter so much as different almond flour brands. But anyways, I use the Kirkland brand for almond flour. I just find it's the best texture, flavor, plus more than anything, it is the cheapest flour I can find. I buy it in bulk either through Costco or on Amazon when it's sold in the double pack. And then for coconut flour, I also find this one to be a cheaper brand, though I also buy the Anthony's brand sometimes too. This one is Viva coconut flour. I don't know if they sell it in the US. I can't remember if that's on the US Amazon, but in Canada, this is the one that I always order. But yeah, like I said, any brand is usually good. So anyways, on to the reason for this video. So we're going to talk about the differences between almond flour and coconut flour. I get people asking me all the time, can I switch out almond flour for coconut flour? If I don't have almond flour, can I use coconut flour? If I don't have coconut flour, can I use almond flour? All the time. If you don't know, I am a keto food blogger. I've been a keto food blogger for about 8 years now. Before that, I was just doing high protein recipes. But I've had a lot of experience baking with both of these and a lot of trials and errors and pitfalls along the way. So I'm here to tell you the best combination of both of these and the right amounts to use in your recipes to get the best desserts possible, because I've been wanting to do this for a while and I was going to make this into a whole course, but I figured I'll start sharing on YouTube because this is a video that I wish I had when I started keto baking, so figured I would share it with you guys. Anyways, on to the important stuff. So in most of your keto baking, you're going to find almond flour is the most common ingredient, I would say, and usually it's the flour that you use the most of. And this is because almond flour just acts the closest to white flour. It provides a good base. Almond flour also tastes better. Coconut flour has kind of, a coconut flour flavor, whereas almond flour doesn't really have much of a flavor that you can notice in any recipes. The only complaint people have about almond flour is that it can be a bit granular, whereas coconut flour is less so. So that's another thing to consider, but I'm going to tell you how you can avoid that completely. Most recipes, you'll see almond flour as the main ingredient. Sometimes coconut flour won't even be there, like is in muffins or cakes or things like that. In my experience, I don't like to just use almond flour on its own. It's good, it can be fine, but it can be made so much better when you combine it with coconut flour. So in normal baking or for keto baking, you don't really use that much coconut flour. Just think of coconut flour as almond flour's side. So it's always there, you're always using it too, but it's never the one in the limelight. It's always just kind of on the side. So that's how I like to think of them. Almond flour is your key player, and then coconut flour is on the side. Mostly in muffin recipes and cake recipes, like I mentioned. For me, I like to use about 2 cups of almond flour to maybe half a cup of coconut flour. And this ratio works really well, not just in cakes and muffins, but in all sorts of recipes. It could be 2 cups of almond flour to 1/4 cup of coconut flour, just somewhere in that range where you're using mostly almond flour and then a little bit of coconut flour. Always seems to provide the best texture and the best flavor. And then on top of that, you always want to add xanthan gum to your recipes. And people ask me all the time, can I leave this out? Do I need this ingredient? And My answer is usually yes. You can leave it out if you want to, but honestly, if you're going to be baking like any amount of keto recipes, just buy it now and thank yourself later. Xanthan gum is like that key thing that keeps your desserts from being crumbly and dry, and it helps them hold together, and it acts a bit like gluten. So you end up with a chewier baked good that's more like the traditional dessert rather than a crumbly keto dessert. And xanthan gum is expensive, but a little bit goes a long way. It'll last you forever, so I highly recommend checking that out if you don't already have it. And like I said, so in terms of this, you want to use more almond flour than coconut flour in most of your recipes. So it's always going to be like I don't know what this ratio is. I'll put it on the screen if I can figure out the exact ratio that I normally use. But that ratio is the key to keto baking. As long as you follow it for almost every recipe, it'll work. And yes, there are exceptions where you'd want to use more coconut flour or more almond flour, but for the most part, this ratio will always work. It's just a matter of you playing around with the balance to see which you prefer. Now that we got that out of the way, I also want to talk about the absorbency differences between the two. That's another question I get a lot. So if you're replacing white flour with almond flour, you basically need about 2 to 3 times the amount of white flour in almond flour. So if you get a recipe that calls for 1 cup of white flour, you're going to need probably 2 cups of almond flour, if not even a little bit more than that, to make up for the difference, because almond flour is not very absorbent and you need a lot of it to make up for what normally would be white flour. Whereas coconut flour, like a 1/4 cup of coconut flour can pretty much make up for almost a whole cup of white flour. And that's not to say that the volume will be the same, but it'll absorb the same amount of liquid. So typically when you're baking with just coconut flour, you want to add an extra egg just to add that extra bulk that you're missing because you're using less flour. But if you're baking with both almond flour and coconut flour, the egg kind of thing is less important, so adding an extra egg is not totally necessary, but sometimes it can help. So because almond flour uses so much flour and basically So because you have to use so much almond flour to replace white flour, this is why I like to use a bit of coconut flour combined with almond flour. So basically, then you're getting the best of both worlds. So the almond flour is going to provide the flavor and the nice texture, and then the coconut flour is going to help thicken everything without adding a bunch of extra calories, since almond flour is more calorie dense. And you're going to need less of it, so you're not using up so much flour every single time. Plus, the overall texture of your baked good it'll come out better if you're using both flours rather than just one. This is why I recommend always having both of these flours in your kitchen, no matter what. If you're just baking with one of them right now, I promise you you're missing out. Just try and grab both of them if you can. And plus, you'll end up saving money in the long run, especially if you've been just using almond flour. You'll find that you need to use a lot less of it when you're also using coconut flour. So, for me, for a really good example, if a recipe calls for 3 cups of white flour and you're trying to make it keto, highly recommend doing 2 cups of almond flour and 1/2 cup of coconut flour. This is pretty much a perfect replacement for 3 cups of white flour. So if you want to translate that or convert it to any other measurement, basically, that is my favorite ratio to use. And a lot of recipes call for 3 cups of flour for some reason, so that seems to be very helpful to know. That is my comparison of almond and coconut flour. I feel like that was a bit all over the place. I apologize. I don't really script out my videos. I just gotta speak from my brain, and if you just saw my baking methods, I'm very all over the place all the time. So here's my current setup, but this is what I'd recommend doing. Always use almond flour first, use a little bit of coconut flour in your recipes. It's not that hard, just more almond flour, less coconut flour, perfect baked goods. Also buy some xanthan gum. You'll find it improves the flavor a lot, and if you're buying something like Bob's Red Mill brand xanthan gum, it'll tell you right on the back of the package how much to add for whatever you're making. Typically, 1/2 teaspoon to 1 teaspoon is plenty for a recipe. You'll find you need less for cookies, more for things like breads that you're making. But I'll do a whole nother video on breads because I actually don't really recommend much of either of these ingredients when you're making keto breads. There's a lot of better flours out there for keto breads, so I'll go over that in another video if you guys are interested in that. And yeah, I hope this was kind of helpful and not too rambly. And I'll see you guys in my next video. Comment, like, and subscribe. I always forget to say that. If you like my videos, it really helps me out. I am trying so hard to grow my channel. I have a whole food blog linked down below if you'd like to check that out with thousands of keto recipes. And yeah, that's about it. I'll see you guys in my next video and have a great day. Bye.